Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne. Disney Pixar holds the record for the studio with the most Oscar wins. They used to be almost the default winner in the animation category, but something is shifting. With this year's Oscar season, Disney officially has hit its coldest streak in its history. It has been defeated in the animation category for the last 4 years. And yeah, obviously the Oscars are kind of a joke. Like, Joseph Fares really said it when he said,
"Okay, can you swear here? Can you swear? Okay.
Freak.
The Oscars, you know?
Freak.
The Oscars!"
During the Game Awards, but it is a really noticeable shift. I think a lot of people have just generally been feeling that Disney and Pixar have been stagnating. Elio did so poorly in the box office that Pixar infamously posted a video on their Instagram where they basically said that people can't keep asking for original stories and complaining about sequels if they aren't going to go show up for them, which is a pretty bizarre and bitter way to promote your film. I want to talk from an artist's perspective about what I think is happening to Disney and especially Pixar, studying some of their leadership statements as well as both of their defeated films from last year, and explain why I personally think this may actually be a really good thing for the animation community in the long run. So the first thing a lot of people point to is that visually, Pixar and Disney are starting to look more and more similar. The two studios used to be very distinct from each other, but over time they've kind of melded together visually. Pixar also used to customize their design and animation style to the story more, and it definitely feels like with movies like Elio, Luca, and Coco, they're kind of in a character rut where all of these young boys look and behave pretty similarly. When you look at some of their competition, it's really clear that the medium is getting pushed in a fresher looking, more unique direction, and that audiences are really liking that. There's also the concern that because Pixar and Disney's 3D style has been so heavily used in AI training, that their movies are starting to look quote-unquote AI generated. This isn't really fair to the studios, as it was their style first, but it's another reason that moving away from this super squishy, overused style might be a good move, as their style is starting to be heavily used by and associated with random food trucks, offensive internet edits, and for creepy t-shirts on the boardwalks of Las Vegas and Atlantic City. And I feel like when talking about Pixar and Disney kind of stagnating, most of the talk on YouTube has been about the visual style, but in my opinion, it's not the style but the substance of their movies that is really holding them back. One of the biggest changes in Pixar and Disney's work lately is the lowering of the stakes. When I first started having this feeling, I thought that I was just perceiving their stories differently because yeah, obviously things felt more serious and scary when I was a little kid. I thought maybe the stakes aren't hitting as hard because I'm an adult now. But when I actually think back to the stories I grew up with, I definitely think that they used to be more intense. Finding Nemo, for example, opens with the massacre of Marlin's wife and nearly all of his children, and his only remaining child is permanently disabled in the attack. Later, the primary characters, including the child, face death multiple times. In The Incredibles, Mrs. Incredible and the children are almost blown up, and Mr. Incredible is tortured on screen. They also face really realistic threats to their well-being, like the primary breadwinner of the family losing his job and the breakdown of the family due to financial stress. The Incredibles has 3 sets of stakes: physical stakes when their lives are at risk, emotional stakes when their relationships are at risk, and philosophical stakes, the battle that they're all facing about whether to compromise their own sense of right and wrong in a world that seems to reward selfish behavior. The belief underlying this movie is that even when evil behavior is legal and can make you rich and powerful, and it seems that trying to help people only gets you in trouble, it is still important to do the right thing. That in the end, altruistic and heroic behavior is right even in a corrupted world. That's what makes The Incredibles feel like a substantial and meaningful movie, and not just a superhero family getting in and out of danger. Philosophical stakes are really important in that way. I think that Pixar has been deliberately sabotaging the philosophical stakes, the underlying beliefs of their movies in the last 4 years. In my opinion, one of the biggest problems for both Disney and Pixar is that over time, they've become increasingly more and more afraid of actually having anything to say. Looking back at some of their more iconic work, there are definitely scenes that feel pretty political, or even just intensely emotional in a way that I don't think is happening as much in their later films. Again, to talk about The Incredibles, one of the earliest scenes involves Mr. Incredible hospitalizing his sleazy boss for putting the profits of the insurance company over the well-being of an innocent person. Can you actually imagine Pixar or Disney having one of their primary protagonists introduced in this way nowadays? Even comparing the original Zootopia to Zootopia 2, the mistakes our heroes make and how they play out is just so dramatically different. In the original, the main character of Judy accidentally starts a hate campaign against the minority population of predators in Zootopia due to her own ignorance. She genuinely lets her own biases nearly destroy her closest friendship. And the movie is very aggressive in showing how people use populism and societal bigotry to attain political power. It's not until she genuinely apologizes and works to right her wrongs that she is able to move forward as a character. And reminder, Zootopia did extremely well, financially and critically. Keep a pin in that fact for later in the video. In Zootopia 2, they try to invoke those same strong societal messages, but the characters of Judy and Nick, as well as the central message, are just not nearly as strong. The character who's mainly victimized in the sequel is barely a character, and Nick and Judy have a very weird arc. Their main conflict seems to be that they think that they're great partners, but sometimes Judy is too dogged in her pursuit and pretty selfish, and Nick wants to play it safe and prioritize their well-being over solving the case, and then they kind of therapy speak at each other towards the end. I personally felt like it was really unsatisfying. Having one corrupt family represent all the evils of society, after doing quite a good job in the first one of showing how, with complex things like bigotry, it doesn't just live in the hearts of evil maniacs but can even pop up in our loved ones or ourselves, I feel like it's a huge downgrade. In a lot of Pixar's older films, the mistakes that the protagonists make are usually one of the biggest forces that actually cause conflict in the film. Oftentimes in their earlier films, they don't even really have villains per se. Like, looking at some of their older villains, they really look more like threats that don't necessarily have a lot of malice. Sid from Toy Story, Darla from Finding Nemo. I saw someone in my comments once saying that the critic from Ratatouille is the villain of Ratatouille, and I feel like that's just completely wrong. He's an obstacle, but what is he actually doing that's wrong? He's a food critic, that's literally his job, and he's clearly very passionate about it, which you see by the end of the film. The real villain is Luigi for trying to take credit for Remy's work, and just generally being kind of a slimeball and betraying his friend. It feels more and more like Disney and Pixar are afraid of letting their main characters actually do anything meaningfully wrong or have any kind of actual arc. Because if the character is already morally pure at the very start, and the only thing that causes conflicts is either misunderstandings or the machinations of like an extremely evil person, there isn't anywhere for this character to grow to. A lot of the time they sort of simulate the feeling that the character has grown and changed just by like having like a moment at the end and like having sort of the music kind of make you feel like something has happened. But a lot of the times the characters actually haven't meaningfully changed in any way, and so it makes it feel really unsatisfying. Another change a lot of people are noticing is that Pixar in particular used to mainly tell pretty high concept stories, ones that are really best told through animation. Toy Story expertly utilizing the plasticky look of early 3D animation to tell a story that would be almost impossible in any other medium. Monsters Inc. puts us in a bustling city full of monsters whose world runs off of child screams with floating door portals. Ratatouille is about a rat who puppets a human man to make his culinary dreams come true in the fantastical imaginary city of Paris. The point is, all these stories were really splashy and unique. They felt really fresh every time. They were stories that you were instantly curious about, like, where would this crazy concept go? And I definitely agree that Pixar and Disney are often not hitting that anymore. When you compare it to the elevator pitch of, say, Elio, which is a space fanatic with an active imagination goes on a cosmic adventure, it just doesn't have like a hook of any kind. When you're introducing a new IP with new characters, you have to have an idea that feels exciting and makes you curious about it. And I find it hard to believe that the creative at these studios just forgot how to do that. So what's really going on? Disney and Pixar have been making statements that imply that putting in too much messaging is why some recent movies aren't performing as well. For example, they seem to conclude that the reason Lightyear didn't do well was because of the small controversy that happened because there was a 1 millisecond gay kiss in it. But is that really why Lightyear didn't do well? Is there really no other possible reason that this bizarre Toy Story tie-in that's lit like an Xbox 360 game didn't delight the children of the world? Let's be serious, Lightyear was a really bizarre concept that didn't spark curiosity or fascination with kids or adults, and especially at the time, it just felt like another sort of cash-grabby way to invoke Pixar's first hit. There are tons of totally beloved stories for kids that involve an LGBT character or relationship. Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Owl House, you name it. This stuff does not destroy interest in a story by itself. Disney seems to be using the culture war as an excuse when a movie flops, when often there is a much simpler answer. Some of these films are not very good. And what's interesting is, their wishy-washiness and meddling with the writer's original vision might actually be at the heart of why these films aren't hitting the same emotionally. And with that, we have to talk about what happened with Elio. So one of the reasons Elio probably felt off to a lot of people is because the writer, Adrian Molina, had to leave the project after many changes were made to his original story, a move that also caused problems with Pixar's Brave. We know now that originally, Elio was a boy who was reflecting Molina's childhood. Molina is openly gay, and Elio was originally going to be queer-coded, apparently. Queer or gay coding of characters is actually really common in Disney movies. They've been doing this forever, though usually their queer-coded characters are villains. A favorite early scene, according to artists who saw the first version, was one of Elio putting together homemade outfits out of trash he collected when he was cleaning the beach, and having a little fashion show. His interest in the environment and making awkward homemade clothes are both things that do not make you cool or popular when you're 11. I can personally attest to that. The Hollister-wearing girlies were not impressed with my endangered species fundraising and the accessories I made with hot glue, Sharpies, and felt. I definitely would have resonated with this character originally. But after Molina left, Elio was apparently made more stereotypically masculine, and his interest in fashion and the environment were removed. According to artists who saw the first version, he went from being a specific character, someone with personal traits that the writer identified with, to a generic little boy. I also think it's really interesting that America Ferrera was announced originally as being cast as Elio's mother, but ended up leaving the project after Molina left, and when it was recast, Olga was turned from his mom to his aunt. It said this in The Hollywood Reporter. Some of Elio's changes were more noticeable than others. When the film was first announced at Disney's D23 fan event in 2022, America Ferrera took the stage to describe her role as Olga, Elio's mom. At the following D23 in 2024, the Emmy winner was announced as having left the film amid scheduling conflicts, with Zoe Saldana joining the cast as Olga, now Elio's aunt. Sources tell THR that Ferrera had already recorded dialogue for the film, but that her decision to exit was attributed to Molina's departure, not to mention that frequently being called back to re-record lines due to script changes likely took its toll. Having watched Elio myself and piecing together the information we have from artists who were working at Pixar at the time, I think I know what happened. And I think that, if this is true, this also can explain why so many of their projects lately are feeling a little flat. So this is just my guess, but we know that Elio used to be characterized as a more gay-coded character, a boy who liked to throw fashion shows and make his own outfits. It was reportedly never going to be a full-on coming-out story, since Elio is only 11, but he clearly used to be characterized as someone whose personality wasn't traditionally masculine enough to be considered normal. That's probably why he felt like an outcast, especially considering that, if Olga was originally his mom, then he grew up on a military base, an even more macho and aggressive environment than most young boys face. Elio in the movie clearly feels like an outsider who has no place on Earth, which is why he's begging for aliens to come take him away. But in the movie that actually came out, where Elio is very much just a normal little boy who loves space, his primary characterization as someone who feels like such an outcast he doesn't belong on Earth stops making any sense, so they killed his parents. That's why his mom turned into his aunt, so his sadness could come from somewhere, but the thing is, that doesn't map perfectly onto the original story. There's a scene midway through the movie where he's talking with his new friend, an alien child whose father is the ultra-macho leader of a hyper-militarized alien race, and they're relating to each other. We have just heard the alien father say that his son is too soft, and he's plotting to enclose him in literally like a mech war suit to make him more like him. More aggressive, more dominant, more masculine. It's so obvious to me that in this parallel, It would have made more sense if Elio was also a boy who is seen as too soft, too silly on Earth in this hyper-militarized environment. But instead they have kind of an awkward conversation where the alien boy is like, "Did your parents die? You're talking about them in the past tense." And Elio's like, "Yeah." And then the alien boy says he knows it's not the same, but he feels like sometimes his dad doesn't even want him. To me, this conversation is a very obvious and kind of clumsy rewrite. It ends with Elio saying, "What if there's nothing about me to want? What if the problem isn't Earth? What if it's me?" If his problem is that he's grieving both of his parents, why is this the emotional crux of his character? It doesn't feel like a grief story, because it wasn't one originally. It feels like an outsider story, and his outsider status doesn't make any sense. So Elio ends up helping the alien kid avoid being entombed in this military uniform weapon suit that would permanently equip him with violent weapons, but also noticeably is full of spikes that point inward like an Iron Maiden. It literally hurts the soft boy inside as it makes him violent and look uniform to all of his compatriots. I'm guessing that Elio, as he originally was, could relate to that experience of having to deform and harm his real self in order to literally fit a militarized, aggressive mold. But what Pixar reportedly did was actually change Elio the exact way that the story was originally speaking against. They bent to societal pressure that a more flamboyant personality or an interest in fashion is unacceptable for a boy, and so they changed him to be more normal and less of an outcast. In the movie, Elio is cloned, and they send back a clone so nobody notices that he's off in this alien world, and basically he tells the clone, "Just be normal." And he later sees that clone interacting with his aunt and basically being like the perfect little boy. I thought that this was interesting, but he's really not that different than the clone. The clone is just happier and less interested in space. This is just what I put together from seeing the movie and reading the reports about the changes, but I'm guessing that the clone in the movie was originally a more acceptable, more normal boy, and that his mother notices and misses her real son, even though he's different. She wants her real kid back. And that would have been a genuinely moving story beat. But in the final version, she just notices it's really him because he's sad. This doesn't really say anything of substance. These changes also make Olga seem like a total sociopath. When a clone comes back from camp instead of her nephew, she openly celebrates the fact that he no longer cares about space, the only thing that brought him joy before. And in the third act of the movie, she literally says to his face that she feels so alone, but that he wouldn't understand. To a boy who in this version had both of his parents die tragically and simultaneously, and who has been getting bruised and bloodied by bullies, that just happened, this is not believable unless she's an incredibly selfish character. The ending of Elio involved the alien father tearing himself out of his carapace, I saw the TV Glow style, crawling out of it covered in wounds from the shell he had forced himself into to hold his son. He says, "I may not always understand you, but I love you." And that was the philosophical stakes of this movie originally, but they do not make sense with our main character anymore. That's why Elio as a movie feels so disjointed and empty. Elio did not fail because people don't want original movies. It failed because somewhere up the chain, business people who don't care about animation were meddling in a personal story and making it generic. They damage the philosophical stakes so that many of the lines that are supposed to be impactful don't even make any sense. When an alien says at the end that you are unique, Elio of Earth, unique can sometimes feel like alone, but you are not alone. What is that even supposed to mean to him? What is it about Elio that makes him unique? That he loves aliens and space? One of the 3 interests little boys are expected to have? It's such a waste. It really feels like leadership at Pixar and or Disney looked at this story and basically said, "We love the message that it's okay to be different, but can you make the character not different? We don't like how different he is. He makes us uncomfortable." This also happened with an already finished episode of Disney's series Win or Lose, where a character's entire storyline was revised so that despite having a transgender actress playing the role and all the animation being completed for the episode, any reference to that character actually being transgender is gone. It seems like they're greenlighting these ideas, having people put tons of work, time, and money into them, and then chickening out at the last minute. Pete Docter said that Pixar needs to make the most relatable movies, implying a shift away from diverse storytelling, and Bob Iger said that infusing messaging in their shows and movies was not a #1 priority. At first, I really did think that this was just Disney and Pixar trying to stay politically neutral because some audiences were genuinely opposed to movies with quote-unquote messaging, and that they were really losing money. I mean, that seems to be the building story and explanation as to some of their internal decisions, and these people aren't stupid, but I realized that that's not actually it. When you think about some of their recent successes, they all have strong quote-unquote woke messaging of some kind. Zootopia was enough of a hit that they made a sequel, and that movie is extremely obviously about bias and racism. Coco was a huge critical and financial success to the point that they've heavily involved it in their theme parks, and it's top to bottom about Mexican culture, something specific, something not the most relatable to everybody. People do seem to like stories that have philosophical stakes or a message. The story has to believe in something. It doesn't have to be a political thing, but it has to have something to say. Otherwise, you're just watching random events happen on screen. And to be clear, Pixar has always done this. They've always had philosophical stakes in their stories, and they've always had autobiographical stuff, emotional stuff in their stories. The difference is that they used to do mainly dad stories, I would say. Like, a lot of their original hits were about a guy of some kind, whether it's a toy guy or an old man in a house or a monster who's a guy, learning to take care of a child. And fatherhood stories are not inherently more universal than any other kind of story, but I'm guessing for a lot of the writers at Pixar who are fathers, this was coming from a real emotional, autobiographical place, and that's why it feels true. The problem is now they're hiring writers and greenlighting stories where the writers are writing from a real, true autobiographical place the same way that the original Pixar stories were. And then they're going in and taking pieces out. And that is why they're starting to feel so hollow. We saw it with Elio, and apparently it's with Hoppers as well. People are saying that the movies are becoming about nothing because foundational pieces about what the movie believes and is about are being removed. And what I couldn't initially figure out is if this type of messaging isn't hurting them critically, and it's also not negatively affecting them with audiences, like it's not hurting their pockets when it comes to tickets, why are they doing this? And then I figured it out.
We're supposed to help people.
We're supposed to help our people! Starting with our stockholders, Bob! Who's helping them out, huh?
Reading this article on NBC News was really interesting because I don't usually get served animation news like this. This isn't your usual fluff piece about the creative process behind Disney or Pixar's new projects, but I think this explains significantly more about the decision-making that has been happening. This article is about a billionaire investor in Disney named Nelson Peltz, who is an activist investor. What is an activist investor, you may ask? Well, basically, it's an ultra-wealthy guy who buys a ton of shares in something to try and exert power over that thing by installing members onto the board and forcing changes that they think will make even more money. This guy has failed so far to push out Bob Iger or install himself or his compatriots onto the board, but he has been on a tirade for years now against diverse movies and shows, saying such charming things as, "Why do I have to have a Marvel that's all women?" and "Why do I need an all-black cast?" referencing Black Panther. Elon Musk endorsed Peltz in the shareholder vote. Yeah, he's involved as well. But don't worry guys, BlackRock came in and put in the vote for Bob Iger and saved the day. Everyone say thank you, BlackRock. No, I think it's extremely weird to think that there are board meetings and shareholder votes of billionaires deciding what animated kids movies get made. Like, I knew they were publicly traded companies, but I didn't realize that the shareholders were directly trying to influence the content of the movies. And I guess that's ultimately the obvious answer to what is going on. Disney and Pixar have become so huge and corporate that they are being subjugated a little bit by their shareholders, and they're so fearful of the culture war that they're unable to put trust in their writers or directors anymore. They can't just let them make a character who reflects their own childhood or say any of their beliefs, because if your goal is to extract money out of as many people as possible, then taking any stance on anything could alienate a customer or two. They can't even say that it's okay to be a boy who likes fashion, because apparently that's too political. And obviously, that is not a good way to make sincere or meaningful art or stories. Well, to explain, let's look at who has been winning over Disney and Pixar these last 4 years. At the start of this cold streak for Disney, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio won, a painstaking labor of love passion project made in gorgeous and unique stop-motion animation. The next year, it was Hayao Miyazaki's 2D hand-drawn animated film, The Boy and the Heron. After that, an underdog Latvian indie studio beat them with Flow, even though it cost a fraction of what their competitors spent. And this year, it was K-pop Demon Hunters, defeating both Elio and Zootopia 2. What is bad news for Disney and Pixar is good news for literally everyone else, who were critically snubbed or ignored for decades in the overwhelming sweeps of these super powerful and well-connected studios. The movies that are winning are not, as Pete Docter has said, the most relatable movies. They are visually really unique. They don't feel nearly as safe or corporate. Is a group of girls who are all K-pop stars who also fight demons literally relatable for everyone? No. Can everyone relate literally to the themes of Del Toro's Pinocchio? Well, no. Good storytelling is an empathy exercise. It can make you feel the feelings of people or inanimate objects or literally anything.
I can pick up this pencil, tell you its name is Steve, and go like this. Oh. And part of you dies.
While it can feel good to have a character who is really similar to you, it should never be a requirement for you to enjoy a story. Disney and Pixar are both still extremely wealthy and are at no risk of closing. An Oscar win for any of these other studios has way more impact than it would on the Disney Corporation. I also think that Disney has been behaving more and more blatantly like a money-grubbing corporation than a house of creativity and storytelling magic, to the point that I think a lot of people, especially younger people, might be surprised that they ever acted any other way. But let's remember, when Walt Disney was alive, his personal beliefs, such as his love for animals and nature, were clearly put into his movies. He did not worry about hunters feeling attacked after watching Bambi and affecting ticket sales. Now, maybe not all of his beliefs should have gone into his animations, but let's stay on topic. Pixar used to be adamantly anti-sequel because it seemed uncreative and too money-hungry. Disney used to be pretty protective of their reputation as creative magic makers, being generous in their theme parks and fastidious in their movie making, quality and imagination being a cornerstone of their brand identity. But obviously things have shifted. They are being more and more transparent about being a corporation first and letting this wholesome creative facade kind of slip, and I think it is hurting them in the public eye. They're still an industry juggernaut and a borderline monopoly, so they're going to be just fine money-wise for a long time, but people don't like feeling manipulated or taken advantage of. Their reportedly wishy-washy behavior with creators wasting years of their work because of pressure from the idle rich is only going to ruin their reputation and burn bridges with talent. I think that Disney and Pixar's aversion to taking risks is becoming a big risk in and of itself. They cannot make meaningful stories if they're constantly worried about angering small groups of people who get outraged like it's their full-time job. They cannot keep trying to make the most relatable stories ever, because when you try to please everyone, you please no one. And I personally do think they should avoid replicating the same art style, not only because the way they used to tailor the medium to their story was so cool, but like I said, this style has now become so heavily cannibalized by AI that now people think their new movies look cheap and AI generated rather than the other way around. It could also be that people are just already getting fatigued with the same old, same old. I mean, this is entertainment after all. People are loving the unique look that other studios are exploring, and it shows. I genuinely loved Pixar so much as a kid, and I really do hope they get out of this slump. But I do think it's good that it's catching up with them the way that they're behaving, and that other studios are getting a chance to show off their art, especially small studios like the one that made Flow. I think it's really exciting to think that animations could be made for a fraction of a Pixar Disney budget and beat them. To me, that really speaks to how much, the actual integrity of the writing and the style really matters, and that this huge behemoth of a corporation cannot dominate this sphere just off of their name alone. But what do you guys think? Do you think my analysis is correct, or do you think there are other reasons these studios are struggling these last few years? Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you to my wonderful members and patrons, including Stefan, Stavo the Gremlin, Roger Baker, Artist James, Esme and Riley, Mr. Bingley, Glubby Wubby, Arugi, Meow 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 Meow, Sea Nerd, Bowl of Soup, Lorena, Mimi Mamori, Frog Scourge, Zachary Smith, Pale Star Poppy, Shaimani, Celery Sticks, The Mousy Mouse, Zora Eyes, Burnt Toast with Bleach, Sopapia, Hicho, TTT Rex, Lonely Purple Zealot, Honey Kitten, Loro, Data, Gashes to Gashes, Skitten, Gold Pikachu, Donut Oat, John Steele, Names Are Gone, Crow Dotus, Sunday Good Enough, Ace Wander, Jordy Plays, Clown of Clubs, Sunshine, River to Goblin, Raz Tarosh, Casey, Graveyard Moss, Grexius, Kingdom Hearts Sucks, The Midwestern Menace, CB, Lucy Amajiki, Ravenscrow, Zocelot, Jabberdabberdo, Light Jewel, Kadaria, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsubaki, Cutie Pie, Ice Cream Pal, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, blah 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 blah.